Good afternoon and welcome to the Bob Woodruff Foundation's webinar, Transition Support for Service Members and Their Families. I'm Coleman Perry, Director of Strategy at the Bob Woodruff Foundation and a Navy veteran who also recently transitioned from active duty in the last couple years. I welcome everyone joining the call today and look forward to hearing from each of our expert panelists. Today's conversation is about more than just veterans finding jobs. It's about helping them rebuild identity, support their families, redefine their purpose. For those unfamiliar, the Bob Woodruff Foundation's Got Your Six network is the largest non-governmental network of organizations serving the military and veteran community. It includes more than 375 partners of varying sizes, focus areas, and geographies working at every stage of support, including transition and reintegration following service. I am confident that this content will be helpful for our partners who are boots on the ground serving the military and veteran community every single day. We have a packed agenda for today's webinar, so please do drop your questions in the box labeled Q&A at the bottom of your webinar screen. If we don't cover your questions during our session today, I will share them with our speakers as a follow-up and include responses when we send out the recording. I'm honored to be joined by 5 distinguished panelists, all veterans and all leaders in organizations shaping what successful transition looks like. First, joining us from Navy Federal Credit Union, a U.S. Navy veteran, George Eichert, Senior Vice President of Workplace Logistics and Infrastructure. Also joining us from Navy Federal Credit Union, a U.S. Army veteran, Brian Parker, Vice President, Member Segments. We also have 3 representatives from our Got Your Six network partners. First, Bill Prom, U.S. Marine Corps veteran and Development Director at NextOp. Tammy Bartlett, U.S. Coast Guard veteran, Vice President of Government Affairs at Student Veterans of America. And Jason Wong, U.S. Coast Guard veteran, Chief Operating Officer at Coast Guard Mutual Assistance. Thank you all so much for joining us. It's great to see you. And George, I'd love to begin with your opening remarks on behalf of Navy Federal Credit Union, and then we'll dive into the panel discussion.
I appreciate it, Coleman. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be invited to participate on this important topic. Candidly, I'm looking forward to listening and learning from the other panelists also. I'm sure they've got all different experiences, lessons learned of what to do and what not to do. I think everyone agrees that the transition from military to civilian life is stressful. And talking about how to best prepare so it's smooth and successful is important. However, as I've lived personally, being in the right place at the right time and knowing when to say yes or no is just as important as preparation. And for the sake of time, I'm not going to recount my good fortune of how I came to Navy Federal. But what I will say is once I interviewed with Navy Federal in 2007, I immediately knew that the member service mission and the trustworthy culture of Navy Federal just fit me perfectly, and that I had found not just a job, but my second career. And so I think it's important to emphasize, at least in my view, that the concept of fit is critical if you're looking for a career and not just looking for a job that puts food on the table. I believe it's in your best interest as you're transitioning, as well as the potential employer's best interest, that you ensure that there's a good fit between what you bring to the table, your skills, your personality, your expectations, values, and compare that to what the company's about, what their mission is, their vision, their culture, and so forth. I equate it to a successful marriage where 2 people need to be a good fit for each other. In my case, since coming to Navy Federal, I've never even considered moving to another job or another organization because I fit in so well here. And as I've told many people over the years, I hit the mother lode when I joined Navy Federal. I was very, very fortunate. And for those of you in the audience that aren't familiar with Navy Federal, we serve all the military services, active duty, DoD civilians, plus the Coast Guard, all veterans and their families. And it's Navy Federal's mission to provide banking services and meet our members' financial needs. And this is especially important during stressful periods, such as when a service member is PCSing or when they're deploying for an extended period, and especially when they're transitioning from active duty to veteran status. And for us to ensure that our staff understands the unique challenges of the military life, our talent acquisition team focuses on hiring veterans and military spouses. And the result is almost half of our member-facing teammates, they've got a direct military connection. And besides military experience, we found that their military roots bring valuable soft skills such as resiliency, dependability, flexibility. They adapt to change. And I think it's also important to say, you know, as an executive at Navy Federal, we know we have to get out of the ivory tower and we got to stay in touch with our frontline teammates. And one way we do that is we occasionally listen to member phone calls or we get a summary of branch visits. And I want you to know that there are times that a service member is dealing with tough breaks, such as, you know, they have a job loss in the family. There's a family member's death or an illness. There's some kind of catastrophic financial loss. And we get to witness how compassionately our member service reps help them through those challenges. I usually end up reaching for a Kleenex in the process and dry my eyes, but it's a great reminder of why Navy Federal was the right fit for me. And I know it's going to sound corny, but our team members really live the tagline, "Are members of the mission." And so I just would summarize that it's my recommendation to anyone transitioning that you pursue an opportunity that matches your values, your skills, and your interests, whether it's self-employment or working in a great organization like Navy Federal, Bob Woodruff Foundation, or the other organizations represented today. And I'm hoping that during the panel today, we can answer your questions and help folks in the audience. Thanks again, Coleman.
Thank you, George, for setting the stage for us. You remind us that transition isn't just resume prep, it's matchmaking, and the stress eases when line up their skills, their personality, and their values with a mission-driven employer, you know, just like your move to Navy Federal in 2007. We're grateful to have all of you here. To kick off our discussion, I'd like to start with the beginning. As George alluded to, transition can be overwhelming, both given, you know, it's exciting given the range of possibilities and opportunities, but also sometimes isolating. Some veterans describe the transition period as intimidating and maybe even more stressful than deployment at times. And fortunately, there is a system in place to guide us through. I'd love to hear brief reflections from the group. Which experience more closely tracked with your own, and what elements of the formal transition process were most helpful, and where did you maybe have to fill in gaps on your own? Brian, I'd love to start with you.
Sure. Yeah. So, you know, as you mentioned, the transition can be really scary, and there's some anxiety that's involved with that, but it's also an exciting time. You know, it is a life moment where you're going from where you served your country to, you know, the opportunity to then serve in other ways. And George mentioned in his open remarks of finding the right fit with an organization. And sometimes that doesn't mean just going straight into the workforce. Sometimes that also means going back to school. And that's, in my case, that's what I did. I used the 9/11 GI Bill to fund my education, and then launched another career after that. So there's a lot of options, and I think it's really imperative for transitioning service members to weigh all those options and determine what is best for them. And, you know, I think a question that, you know, personally I grappled with was, do I stay at, you know, my duty station in that area? I happen to be stationed in the DC market when I transitioned out, or do I go back to my home of record, which in my case was Illinois, outside Chicago? I chose to stay in the DC area. And so it's kind of like this series of decisions that you need to make. And everyone's journey is a little bit different. So you kind of have to put all your options out on the table and evaluate them and determine what's best for you. And I'd also consider the external environment. I got out at a time when, employment rates were a little bit, unemployment rates were a little bit high. Organizations weren't hiring as much, which helped to drive the decision to go back to school for a little bit to let that settle. It turned out to be, a good move, but that doesn't mean, that applies for everybody. So certainly weigh your options, consider what is best for your own situation. And this is a time to think about, and I know this is tough for service members sometimes, it's your time to think about you and your family. And oftentimes when we're wearing the uniform, we're thinking about the mission, we're thinking about our fellow service members, which is, the right thing to do. But when you're transitioning, you have to oftentimes prioritize yourself, and that can be a little bit of a mind shift for those wearing the uniform. So I'd encourage you to think about prioritizing some of your own efforts and what you want to do, weigh your options, and go from there.
Thank you, Brian. Tammy, George stressed fit, Brian talked choice and weighing your options. Would you share some of your reflections from your transition?
Sure. Thank you for the question. My transition was definitely not your normal traditional transition. I was ending my contract in February of 2003. At that time, I was going through my out physical and going through TAP, where I pretty much was an E4 surrounded by chiefs who were retiring. And they were talking about things that I just couldn't grasp onto at the moment at that time. So it kind of just like went right over my head. While going through my out physical, it was suggested that I go through a med board process, which should have been brought to my attention 2 years prior when I had the incident. So going through TAP at that time and then waiting out the med board process for 8 to 10 months was very dark, because here I was all ready to leave. I was trying to put things in place back home so I could use some of my terminal leave to make that transition from Texas to Pennsylvania, but kind of like had to put it all on hold to really wait for the med board that was going to be completed. And then once that was done and Coast Guard came back with 30%, I knew that was exactly where I wanted to move forward. And within 24 hours, like I was transitioning, like I was making moving arrangements and stuff like that. So it was quick. But then when I got home in Pennsylvania, they said it was 2003. So it was a little different that time and very rural Pennsylvania. And I felt I was kind of like left on my own devices to figure this all out. My greatest suggestion for those who are transitioning or who have transitioned recently or who are looking for another journey path forward, connect with your local community, your county veteran offices. They're a valuable resource that I wish I would have done from the very beginning, because not only did I go ahead and process my VA claim and get myself in VA healthcare, but it took me a few months to figure out that I could use my Montgomery GI Bill. And then later on, I ended up using my VRNE to continue my education.
Tammy, thank you for sharing your story. You spotlight some of that loneliness gap between kind of clearing the out processing and then actually stepping into civilian life and reinventing, especially for junior enlisted who maybe don't always see themselves in the retiree crowd. And we certainly understand the importance of giving service members that soft place to land before their needs become more evolved and urgent. Jason, I'd love to hear from you. What suggestions do you have for what organizations can maybe do upstream to support service members earlier and before they hit a point of crisis or need?
Sure, thank you. And I'll expand on what Tammy was talking about, the Transition Assistance Program. So for the Coast Guard, I mean, we take this course and all the services do. I think for me, what I found out going through that was how unprepared I was. Like it really opened my eyes. Like, oh my gosh, I'm not ready. I'm a year away, and there's a lot more that I need to do. And TAPS just gave me the framework of where I need to start. So, some of the gaps I had to fill in on my own was really, as already George and Brian mentioned, was finding your sense of purpose outside of the uniform, and how was I going to do that? Establishing a new routine, right, without the structure of the military. And then there's an emotional aspect of adjusting as well. But to answer your question, as far as what organizations can do upstream and during the process and after, I think more individualized counseling, and information as far as this is what you need to do now, and this is how things are going. Not one size fits all briefings, because it's challenging to digest all the information they're giving you and make sure you're doing everything you need to do to transition, from VA information to financial information to resume building, interview skills. It's a lot to grasp. So I think individualized counseling or coaching should be offered before, during, and even after the process. It'd be nice to have every member transitioning have someone you're working with, and who can say, "Hey, you're not alone. Here's what you need to do next." And that should start, more than 12 months out. It's 24 months out. You should start looking at stuff like that when you're retiring.
Thank you, Jason. To your point, that TAP gives you a checklist or a framework, as you said, but purpose, routine, mental and psychological fitness, they require a personal plan and ideally one-on-one guidance that it's hard to find. And as you said, transition's not is not one size fits all, and veterans are not a monolith. I, for one, certainly would not have been able to access many of the skill building or job searching resources from a submarine or a ship. Um, I'm curious, for the group, how have you seen the transition experience differ, whether that's by rank, branch, community, timing, type of duty? And maybe we'll start with Bill. And Bill, you could maybe share a little bit more with us about why NextOp focuses on mid-grade enlisted veterans.
Yeah, I'd be happy to, because it's a big part of what we do. It's what, in many ways, what defines us. And that we provide employment assistance specifically for enlisted service members, with that focus really being that mid-grade. Like Tammy, your story, if we were around 11 years earlier, you would have been a perfect candidate for us. And that's the challenges that you were talking about are why we do what we do. And we focus on this population for a variety of reasons. One, it's large. It's about 80% of the military, but they also have some of the greatest challenges and the fewest resources often. They're doing very technical, they're typically doing the more technical roles that are very transferable, just not as obviously transferable. It's a population that's usually entering straight out of high school. So any civilian work experience they have is generally that part-time job in high school, not really something that lends itself to family sustaining wages. We mentioned challenges with skill translation. When their only experience in the civilian world is that, or the military, they're not speaking that language to be able to translate those highly technical skills that they have. Again, generally, they're not going to have the same professional network that's developed or the alumni groups that a lot of more senior officers and senior enlisted will have. That also makes for fewer opportunities. George, you mentioned being in the right place at the right time, that it's kind of just starting to dig away at some of those opportunities available. Uh, there's just less exposure to some of those careers as well. And then over 60% we find have dependents to provide for. So there is an urgency when they're getting out, especially those like Tammy that are not retiring after 20 years. They're getting out after maybe one or two enlistments. They have a young family to support. they don't have these connections, the foot in the door with these companies, you can see how underemployment becomes an issue. And that's really why we focus on this population. And to what Jason was saying, we take that individualized approach, that it is about creating that individual plan for each person so that we can create that fit that George was talking about, that it's working with both the candidates and our employers to create that ideal match. That's how you're going to get better retention, faster advancement, and it's best for both parties that way.
Thank you, Bill. And George or Brian, I'll go back to you. Service members and their families have a lot of structured support during their active duty time, but we see that can change fast. You go from basic allowance for housing, TRICARE health insurance and other benefits, and then maybe you find yourself on the other side trying to sort those elements out. And I think Bill zeroed in on this hidden middle, the mid-grade enlisted who bring a set of mission critical skills, but maybe lack tools or networks, and then he also mentioned the family starting to feel the wage pinch pretty fast. What does strong financial readiness actually look like for a transitioning service member and their family?
Yeah, no, and thanks, Bill. I fell into that, enlisted category. I left the Army when I was in E6. So there certainly are some financial aspects, and Coleman, you had mentioned them already, around making sure that your insurance is squared away. I highly recommend looking at your budget where it is now before you transition, and predicting where it will be, assuming that you might go a couple months perhaps without a job. So building up an emergency fund now is imperative. I'd say even building that up a year out from your transition is going to be key. And working with, if you do have a spouse or a family, I think this is military spouses often face so much hardship when they're going through that transition phase as well. They have bore the brunt often of PCS moves where they've had to get a new job or a new role. So make sure you're communicating with your spouse to ensure that they also have a plan set up, and you have a joint plan set up. But there's other things like making sure your TSP rolls over, making sure, again, if you're not retiring your TRICARE, you'll have to transition your insurance services. And even if you are staying in the location around where you left the military or going back to your home of record, the military will pay for you to go back to your home of record. However, you do need to make the decision on where you're going to live. Is that renting? Is that buying? Evaluating the housing market and determining what's best, again, for your situation. Or if you're going back to school, the GI Bill will cover the cost of tuition to a degree, as well as a book stipend and a housing allowance. So there's all these variables that, as Bill mentioned, there's no one size fits all, but there's organizations that will work with the individuals to develop a plan of action, including Navy Federal, where we have personal financial management counselors who will walk through your budget with you and determine what opportunities or gaps that you might need to fill as you're transitioning.
If I may, I'd like just to add, I think, first of all, I think what everyone said has been on target. But I'd like to refocus a little bit of what Brian talked about, because anyone who's transitioning, each one is their own case. They may have a spouse. They may not. Their spouse may or may not work. There may be some other issue in the family, and what their financial situation is and their personal situation is going to be widely disparate. I think what's critical is preparation and advanced planning, and whether the person is retiring after 20 or more years, or whether they're just going to get out after their first enlistment. Once the decision is made, they need to treat that as that is their next mission. And they need to begin the preparations from the financial standpoint, from the family standpoint, from planning for what the job might be. What do they want to do with their career? Are there people in their area that they work in that you can start the networking process? People who got out recently, whether they retired or had just gotten out, are in the type of work that you're interested in and that you feel you have the skill set for. And you want to be able to begin creating that network because you never know when there's an opportunity. This may not be a big secret, but most jobs and companies are not planned years in advance. They're suddenly available. And suddenly there is a need in an organization for a particular skill set, and there wasn't a requisition placed on it 9 months in advance. And so you need to be prepared, and there's going to be opportunities that will become available. And it's through having those networks and so forth that you can then jump on that opportunity and have the financial capacity to do it. So again, I just can't counsel hard enough that procrastination is not your friend. Getting ahead of it and planning ahead, so then when the opportunity is available, you can strike and you can say yes. And then if I may, just to follow on that thought, once you start to narrow it down, you'll also need to know what you want to say no to and not focus attention on the types of jobs that just sound like a job, but it really isn't the right fit for you. And I know in my personal experience, when I was working, being interviewed by Navy Federal, I had a handful of other opportunities that were being presented to me, and most of them were going to result in job offers. I mean, I was in a very good position. I was very, very fortunate. But I quickly decided that while those jobs had some interest to me, I could already tell there was no way it's going to match the benefits of, let's say, Navy Federal, and I had one other opportunity that was pretty close. And so I just pushed those aside and politely said no and focused my attention on where it was important. And that would be my counsel to everybody. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, George. You underlined that every transition is an n equals 1 scenario, and I think Jason said something very similar, and the common denominator is preparation. So once you commit, you've got to treat that transition like it's your next mission. Tammy, you've lived that individualized mission. What was step one in your op order back in 2003, and what do you advise to veterans and transitioning service members who are thinking that education is their next mission?
Yeah, so my Op 1 mission was just trying to get back to Pennsylvania and figuring out what was next steps. Just because the last few months of my Coast Guard career, I've just really just tried to figure out how to get through my med board while still doing Coast Guard mission, and knowing that there'll be a moment where I need to pivot. And then once I did move back home, really relying on my family to help me figure out next steps. I want to mention earlier, it's so easy for us veterans transitioning to isolate, but it's not something that we can do. We need to definitely reach out and just start talking to each other. Same thing with the veteran family, those transitioning family members that come along with us. When we all PCS from each base, our family members get in touch with the families that are already there at that next unit and try to make those connections early to what's the best place for childcare, what's the best schools. And so having that type of next step in addition for our transitioning service members to know the veteran families that are in the space, to make those connections and grow that community among us all. At SBA, we feel that guidance counselor, that high school guidance counselor we had when we transition out is missing, to help us sort through those next steps if higher education is our journey. And so through that, about a year and a half ago, we launched our advisory center where transitioning service members, veterans, dependents, family members can go on to our portal platform, and we use AI just to walk through the first steps of trying to figure out their goals and their hobbies, maybe what they did in the military and how they transitioned in the future. I was an operations specialist in the Coast Guard, which doesn't transition very well out into the civilian world unless you want to be an air traffic controller. Um, but through that AI and then integrating our career coaches can see a path forward, a career that that individual will thrive at. And then through that career, match up if they already have those certifications and undergrad and expertise to lend to that career. And if not, where can they find that? What institution of higher education? And then we have something very similar to the GI Bill comparison tool to help with that next step. In addition, having that SVA chapter on those comparison tools. So if you're looking for that next connection and you know that institution of higher learning is where you see yourself going, but you want to grasp onto that peer support and grasp onto that veteran and military family community, you'll know that there's an SVA chapter there that you can reach out to and say, hey, I'm interested in going to school ABC. And what is your experience? How can I make this a smooth transition for myself? And can we sit and have a coffee and see how this all goes? And then on our back end of that, we have our vetted career board and a vetted job board, which just, again, helps with that next step. I really wish I had that almost 30 years ago, 20 some years ago, because I transitioned, became a pharmacy technician for about 10 years, where my disability then got in the way of my job. And finally seeking mental health help at the VA and getting connected with a social worker who pretty much drugged me down to VRNE that very first day. And it's like, you're going back to school. You have so much more to give. And then it was that path forward for my undergrad and my master's.
You know, you highlighted so many themes that I want to talk to the group about. And I love to hear what SVA is doing. You know, I think you highlighted something important, that, you know, going home can still feel somewhat lonely or isolating, and the built-in military community is gone. So those early connections and guidance counselor type resources like SVA's advising center are really essential. Um, you also highlighted, you know, this translation of service to experience that's relevant to civilian employers, and that's a really tough hurdle for many. Um, and we've kind of talked about, you know, translating that language that into or translating that experience rather into language that's relevant and understandable for employers is a bit of an art and a science. Bill, I'd love to hear what's your go-to advice to veterans to help their employers understand the depth and relevance of the skills that they gain through service. And maybe what's one thing you see veterans overlook when trying to tell their story?
Quite simply, the easiest advice, don't do it alone. There's others out here who want to help. It's okay to ask for help. To kind of help expound on that and explain some of that, the problem too is quite simply we're using the word translate. That inherently implies speaking two languages. And if you are going into this speaking only the language of the military, that's the only adult work experience you have, you can't expect to actually be able to translate it appropriately and understand what the uh, employer is really looking for. So that's where, whether it's NextOp or other organizations, just through your local VFW, finding a mentor, someone like that who has a foot in both doors. That's really what we try to do, especially with our employment coordinators. They're all veterans themselves that have gone through this, where they can speak both the language that the employers are looking for and to that veteran experience to understand qualitatively and quantitatively how best to orient your experience and skills so that employers understand. Similarly, NextOp and the other organizations here, we need to be doing that industry outreach too to help employers understand what the experience these veterans and service members have gone through and how it can translate. And then just individually, we also have a responsibility to kind of put the ladder back down for the next generation to come. That like Brian and George, it definitely sounds like you're doing it at Navy Federal, and that's what we talk to our candidates about. Like once you are in that company, help out the next round, So be that advocate for veteran hiring to help understand those barriers they might have to veteran employment. That typical you need like 3 years of experience of the proprietary software uh, for an entry level job. That's non-existent. If they've done GCSS within any branch, they can probably work whatever Walmart and Amazon and other logistics companies are using. So it's incumbent on us to try and be that best advocate as well to help out those behind us.
Thank you, Bill. It's really insightful, and I love this stressing finding a mentor who speaks the civilian language and can teach you that language. Jason, I want to go to you and shift gears a little bit. We've talked about transition for the service member, and we've started to talk about families because we know they transition too, emotionally, logistically, financially. When the whole family is transitioning, who plays that translator role, and how does CGMA support families during the transition process?
Really, it's a family journey, right? Not just the individual. So for me, the year I retired 2 years ago, so not only was I retiring, uh, we needed to find a place to live, so bought a new house. Um, I started the job with Coast Guard Mutual Assistance, a new job, and then my wife and I were becoming empty nesters. My last daughter was going off to college. So a combination of things were happening in that 1 year after 30 years, of everything being done for me, right? Uh, Everything taken care of from paid to, health insurance to life insurance to now I got to figure it out on my own with my family. So what helped? I guess open communication between my spouse and I, my daughter, just about expectations and what our plans was after retirement, what it would look like. And everything happened very fast for me and related very much with what George and also how I'm in this position now because the former CEO of Coast Guard Mutual Assistance and I, she's a retired admiral. We served together over 15 years ago when she was the commanding officer of the Coast Guard Training Center, and I was working there. And she was one of my mentors. So when she posted the job position here at Coast Guard Mutual Assistance, I really didn't even think about it. I thought I was going to go into the medical field. That's my background. That's where my degrees are. So I thought I was going to do something in healthcare. But through, the network and speaking with her, interviewing for the position, expressing interest, I'm here. So family wise, I think making sure that my spouse had the resources as well, not only for me, resources for her transition. And as I mentioned before, what was missing, I think the individualized uh, counseling, I guess we didn't even look into that option and organizations out there that offer this service. We just kind of figured it out on our own. So how does CGMA help families transitioning? So we offer all of our services through interest-free loans and grants. So some of our programs really help our service members if they're looking to purchase a house. We have a closing costs loan program, which is interest-free. We also have a lot of grant programs for education, childcare, for moving that helps reduce the out-of-pocket expenses when service members are transitioning. So there's a lot that we do as far as programs in both aspects of loans and grants, all aimed towards increasing our service members' financial resilience and helping out reduce the out-of-pocket expenses that come with the transition.
Thank you, Jason. It's really insightful, and I love this whole family op order to talk early and talk often. Um, you know, George, I'd love to go back to you because you kind of brought in this mission mindset early on, and you said, treat transition as the next mission. Um, one of the more difficult and underestimated aspects of transition is that change in mission, personally and professionally, so to speak, and the need to redefine purpose and identity. Practically, how does someone go about writing a civilian mission statement that feels as compelling as maybe their military one was?
Candidly, I hadn't thought about trying to write the mission. I can just say from my own lived experience, um, I was in the Navy. I was call it a support function. I wasn't the tip of the spear. I was supporting the spear for the Navy, and so therefore I was dealing with things like building infrastructure, logistics, taking care of the people, if you will, so they could go to war and go fight. And candidly, that was my mindset for years. I call it the trying to be a servant leader. How do you support folks so they can go do their mission? And so when I sought a second career, I decided that's what I want to do. I want to continue in that some type of role in a similar because I'm comfortable with that, and it brings me joy to help others. And so that's actually what I do at Navy Federal. And so I'm doing basically what I did for the Navy, I do for Navy Federal: support all the infrastructure, support the people. Our internal manpower, if you will, are my customer. And they support then the membership and all the different customers. So if I could, just from that analogy, I would just say is you need to know what your sweet, every person needs to know what their sweet spot is, what brings them satisfaction. And then that's their mission, and try to map that into the private world. It could be you could be a teacher. If you're an instructor in one of the services, you could go then become a private teacher, and you can go on and so forth. That would be my sense, is that you want to do something similar because you're already be comfortable and you've got the skill set. And I think, Kim, if it was Bill or Jason, I just would like to jump in on our military folks, from their experience, they've got the skill sets. They don't always necessarily have the exact technical mapping to the private sector, but they've got all the fundamentals. First and foremost, maybe try to be a little funny. They're not snowflakes. They're tough. If you've been in the military and you've been serving, you're tough. You've got a good mindset. That's valuable. You know how to communicate, you know how to follow the chain of command, you've got that flexible thinking. Any of the services, you have to have that. And so there's a lot of private industry that is going to be all over that if they understand it. And that's where people like Bill and Jason, we can all help, translate. And because to me, that's extraordinarily valuable. So I don't know if I really answered your question. I did the best I could on a short fuse there.
But thanks, George. I put you on the spot, and you certainly remind us, that you're thriving as the Navy's, behind the scenes enabler, building infrastructure, caring for sailors, and I love to hear that your post-service joy still comes from helping others succeed. Bill, to you, both would love to hear personally if your new sense of purpose after service aligned with your current role immediately, or if there was some searching involved, and what you see for the veterans that you support, in terms of kind of landing that first thing right out of service.
Yeah, great question. And I'd say, like, for me, my transition in a lot of ways, I didn't realize I wasn't really done with my transition until a few years ago. And I left in 2014. That I spent a long time doing, it was a meandering route to where I am. It's a straight line when I look back. It was incredibly stressful along the road, but in a lot of ways, actually, it was getting to NextOp is where I found my new purpose. That it's just such incredibly fulfilling work for for me that I never question, am I doing good, supporting our mission? Uh, so one of the, I guess, lessons from that, I'd say, yeah, it's great to find that fulfillment in the work. The mission doesn't always have to come from your work too, though. That there, you can find it through your faith, through volunteering, through other hobbies, activities, community, things like that. But one of the lessons really to take too is that, like, don't expect that you're going to step away from the military right into the next best thing. It's not always that way. It's just another step in the journey that you're on that may be tough, may be arduous, may not make any sense. But if you have faith in it, put in that preparation that George and Brian especially were talking about, like prepare yourself for it so that you can afford to go on that journey, essentially to find out where you are in the least stressful way possible. But that for me is kind of where I found that fulfillment.
Thanks, Bill. That certainly resonates with me. I got very similar advice when I transitioned from the Navy a few years ago, and was told that it probably wouldn't find that perfect mission fit on the first roll out the gate, and it'll take a little time as you redefine. I want to bridge a little bit to rebuilding identity, and Brian, I see you nodding a lot. I think I see, Bill just admitted his real transition finished only when he kind of rebuilt that sense of purpose. How did you go about reconstructing your own identity once the uniform came off, and how do
Yeah.
you advise transitioning service members?
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't think we ever lose the identity of being a veteran. I think it's a part of who you are oftentimes. It doesn't have to be the only part of who you are, but it certainly is a part of your journey, as Bill had mentioned. And in my own personal journey, I kind of found that through school a little bit, and actually the student veterans the SVA really helped out too. The school I went to had an excellent program for student veterans who I just connected with them, and we, had some similar backgrounds, and they not only helped me find a group of individuals who had shared experiences, but they helped me to navigate the GI Bill process and things like that. And that allowed me to have a little bit of a soft launch, if you will, into civilian life, where I was still a veteran, I was still connected to the military somewhat, and still felt like I was contributing to the community in different ways, as Bill mentioned, whether it's through community service or through faith or other things. There are still ways that you can serve, and I think that's a commonality that veterans have, is that sense of service. And what that looks like for you is that varies by individual, but identifying what that is. And I can remember going through, like, after I graduated, going through almost a prioritization exercise of, do I want to chase the financial aspect, the money part of it? Do I want to chase more of the purpose part of it, or is there a balance of the two? And I can remember just sitting down and just mapping out, like, what were my priorities. And sometimes you have to fail in order to learn what those priorities are. And I can remember getting my first post-military job and just being miserable, absolutely miserable, because I think I prioritized the wrong things. And that's what caused me to sit down to say, you know what, I actually really care about the purpose. And if I am attached to a purpose, whatever purpose that might be, then I feel like I can be more productive and can continue to serve in different ways. So that exercise really helped me to understand the things that I personally care about and attach myself to an organization that has those shared and aligned values for what I care about too. So, and I had a mentor once tell me that do what you love and the money will follow. And I think I reversed order that first when I first left the military, and I then got my priorities straight, and I think you have to understand what your passions are and prioritize what those are as well.
Thanks, Brian. And we certainly know that failure is a great teacher. But if we can avoid it, we'd certainly like to. Tammy, you mentioned SVA's guidance program and how they support service members and families kind of making that transition. What kind of ongoing support do you provide to student veterans throughout their education journeys, and what is what's maybe a common thing or a common piece of advice that SVA offers?
So, Brian, it was great to hear that you were also involved in your SVA chapter. I myself was involved in my SVA chapter at Temple University during my undergrad time, and that's really where I made this change. I attended my first NatCon, which is SVA's national conference, and there heard some great speakers like Bob McDonald, and he had mentioned how we were all leaders and we couldn't leave change to chance. And so I went to that conference wanting to become an epidemiologist and travel the world and study diseases, but I left wanting to do veteran advocacy and really took the advantage of being at that conference with the individuals that were already doing that work and building my network from there. So I really feel SVA has granted me the opportunity to build my network. Later that summer, I did a Mission Continues Fellowship with SVA right around the time of the Forever GI Bill. And the previous VP of Government Affairs at SVA was like, I don't want to see you. I want to know you're having coffee with someone, or you're up on the hill, meeting a staffer, or just sitting in a hearing, just being involved in DC as it is. So my greatest advice is just be involved. If you see an event that you have a free evening or free time, or even like today, a webinar that you have some time in your afternoon, click on it. Reach out to all of us on LinkedIn. Start up a conversation with us, maybe a virtual coffee, but just grow your network, because that is really your net worth going forward. And here at SVA, we've kind of like taken it one step forward, and now I have the opportunity to, advocate on behalf of student veterans and their families, and things like expanding access to online monthly housing allowance. We have a bill on the House side that if you're taking all your classes online and you're a full-time student right now, as it's written, you receive half the monthly housing allowance, which is like $1,100. But you're taking those classes online. You're a full-time student. You're dedicating that time just because you're taking it online, because that may be the way it fits with your family or fits with yourself. And so there's a bill on the Hill that we're supporting, which would help bring that to the full national average of monthly housing allowance. Doesn't help with the parity exactly, but it helps in a way. That's an additional $1,000 to help out families while their veteran or dependent is going through this journey of higher education. And then someone mentioned earlier book stipend. So post 9/11 GI Bill book stipend's been $1,000 since like 2010, 2011. So there is another bill that helps with the adjustment of that, asking for $1,400 annual for book stipend, and then codification to help with inflation. So those are just some of the things we're looking to help advocate for this year.
Tammy, that's wonderful, and thank you for sharing those. And would definitely encourage any student veterans or rather service members considering a transition to education to reach out to SVA and learn more about the work that your team is doing so well. I'd love to just close this out as we wind down, for each of you, if you could travel back in time and give your past self one piece of advice for that first day of transition, or even, if someone walks in your door today, and what's the one piece of advice you wish every transitioning service member and their family would act on tomorrow? And Jason, I'd love to start with you.
So from my perspective, there's a ton of resources and organizations to help. The Got Your Six network is one of them that just has a plethora of resources. Mentors, organizations was already mentioned, but looking at what's available to you and for your specific need whether it's just resume writing or whether it's something else. It's out there. You just got to find it and take advantage of it.
All right, Brian, you're off the hook already.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking about this question, and we didn't talk about this much, but for me, it would be humble. And what I mean by that is, I can remember, leaving the military, and at the time I was in charge of a platoon and expecting to go right into kind of a middle management type of position. And I was humbled a little bit in that no one would hire me as a manager, and I went in as an individual contributor. But that also motivated me to get back to leading people, which I really cherish and I love doing, and I love doing in the military. So, I think it's be humble, lean on your network, as Jason had said. All great advice, but that's where I would go. And just veterans provide so much value, but also keep in mind that keep that humbleness about you. I think that will take you a long way.
Thank you, Brian. Bill, love to hear from you.
Yeah, mine it actually relates to Brian's a bit. It's quite simply, it's okay to ask for help. There's no shame in that. You don't have to be on the journey alone. More likely than not, others want to help you. Like others find their fulfillment in helping those that need that help. Like you're doing them a service in some ways by just asking for help. People want to. My wife is probably laughing if she's listening to the idea of me saying that I do that, because she would probably say I still need to work on it. But yes, ask for help.
Tammy, you said be involved and take every opportunity. Do you have any other parting wisdom?
Yeah, I just have two quick things. For myself, identifying as a veteran for many years just wasn't something I did, even though I received care and my comp and pen through the VA. So when individuals say, I was just or I just did this in the service, it's really pulling on those strings and finding out that, yeah, even though I was just a Houston ship channel controller in Houston, Galveston, I managed millions of dollars of cargo through such a small ship channel. Just make sure they didn't run into each other along the way. But those were tidbits and bullets I could add to my resume. And then lastly, just something I mentioned earlier, don't do this alone. If you feel concerned, reach out and call the National Suicide Hotline at 988 press 1.
Thank you, Tammy and George. Any parting thoughts?
I think everyone's comments were on target. I have two real quick things. One is as you make the transition, you might not get it right when you get that first job. Once you know that, acknowledge it to yourself and start looking for the next job and cut your losses quickly. Don't linger with it. And then secondly, I would say a lot of times people get very focused on the job offer salary and focusing on salary, and they're not thinking necessarily long term of what the organization is, the job, and the potential to grow their career there. The money can come, but there's a lot of other factors for career growth, location, travel opportunities, all on and on and on. Think long term, think big picture, and you'll make the best decisions probably for yourself. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. And as we wrap, I do want to reinforce that transition is not a solo journey. It's a conversation with yourself, with your family, with your community, and with the organizations like the ones represented here today. And so whether you're a service member about to embark on your transition from the military, or an organization positioning yourself to support transitioning service members and their families, this conversation does not end with today's discussion, but is meant to serve as a starting point. We at the Bob Woodruff Foundation are proud to support this conversation and this work, and even prouder to do it alongside our incredible Got Your Six network partners and Navy Federal Credit Union. In the coming weeks, we'll be sending out an email with the link to the recording and responses to questions you submitted. We hope you'll share this information with your networks loudly. And finally, thank you to our panelists, George, Brian, Bill, Tammy, Jason, and all of those who started the conversation with us today. We're grateful for your participation and for your service. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day.